How do I say this like without getting in trouble? If you are for some reason like, no, actually, I love billionaires, then yeah, this book isn't for you. They're published authors. I feel like they look down on other writers. Does being traditionally published make you feel differently towards non-published authors? Hi, I'm Kayam Fajardo. I am a science fiction and fantasy author. My debut novel, Local Heavens, is a queer cyberpunk reimagining of The Great Gatsby. It came out this past October with Bindery Books in North America and Zafra Books in the UK. You can buy it now wherever books are sold. So this is going to be my very long traditional publishing debut author Bindery Books Q&A. There were a lot of things I remember wishing that I could ask, things that I didn't know around the time that I went on sub, and also when I got my book deal. Also, my publisher is not making me make this video at all. Like just to be clear. But if anyone at Bindery is watching this, hey guys. In previous years, I've kind of done like a writing year in review. I'll just give like a debut year highlight reel. I'm probably going to be missing a lot of things, but the main thing was, yeah, Local Heavens came out. Drafting that book seriously back in 2023, so it's very cool and surreal that it is on shelves now. It was mentioned in the New York Times twice. We made a whole bunch of like most anticipated / best of 2025 SFF lists. We got a couple special editions. We were, of course, nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards for science fiction and many other cool things. How does Bindery Books as a publisher differ from Big Five or other traditional publishers? The typical submission process with a traditional publisher is that you write a book, you get an agent, you edit the book with your agent, then your agent takes it out to publishers, submits it to acquiring editors. That acquiring editor has to like get in-house support at an acquisition meeting, and then you get an offer, and then you get your book deal. And then you go on to like edit the book with your editor. At Bindery, manuscripts are submitted to tastemakers, who are bookish content creators that work directly with Bindery. These content creators have existing social media platforms, and tastemakers operate in the role of an acquiring editor for their micro imprints that sit under the Bindery Books umbrella. So Bindery is the publisher, and then there's like imprints underneath Bindery. So for example, Local Heavens is published by Bindery Books, but it's under the Inky Phoenix Press imprint that is led by Catherine Budig. The goal with Bindery is that tastemakers are acquiring titles that they know will cater to the tastes of their audience. They are not necessarily having to acquire titles from the place of like, this is what the market trend is. They're really just acquiring based on what they like. And also oftentimes what they feel are gaps in the market that they're not seeing being published elsewhere. Bindery also has their own platform / app that operates similar to like a bookish specific Patreon. You can follow a tastemaker's Bindery for free. There's also tiered memberships that you can join if you want. And at every tier, audiences get different levels of access to like the behind the scenes process of seeing the book come to life after it's acquired. And the idea is that even before the book releases to the public, you can follow along on the book's publication journey. And before it hits shelves, there is already an audience that knows about it and is invested in it. It is already so hard to get people to buy books. Like think about the last time you bought a book, last time you pre-ordered a book. As an author, I only really started buying books regularly after I started writing because I knew how much buying books actually supports authors. I still use my library quite a bit, but like it is physically impossible for a reader to buy every single book that they want to read. They don't even know that the book exists a lot of the times. Like 50% of the battle is visibility. So in Bindery's mind, establishing the connection and having people know about the book, care about the book before it even comes out, that is really crucial in helping a book build buzz. I was also asked what my experience was like working with Bindery's tastemakers as someone who is a content creator myself. I think it definitely took some of the pressure off. I ended up doing my own social media posts because I wanted to, but at no point did Bindery ever tell me that I had to. That is the whole point of basically pairing every book with a content creator. But because I already do a lot of social media, it was really just something that I did on my own, like it to supplement what my publisher was doing. And I think it did help. Like I think it's really hard for authors to not have any social media presence at all. I think some things that were very unique with my experience with Bindery is that I didn't have to do anything like brainstorm or pay for my own pre-order campaign or any giveaways. Like if I ever wanted to do something like that, all I had to do was like tell my publisher and they would handle it. Design and make and print like bookmarks and other bookish things, those like VIP boxes that you might have seen online. They do that for every single title. I was also very grateful that my publicist made sure that we got a lot of really great media coverage. Publishing is so low key, high key, pay to play. A lot of authors like who you see getting just like a lot of really, really great publicity. Oftentimes, if they are not a lead title at their publisher, they are paying for that publicity out of pocket. My publisher also arranged my book launch for me in New York City, which I appreciated. I didn't have to do anything for that except show up. But because me and my tastemaker, Catherine, got along super well and she was so welcoming to me, I knew that if I had a question or if I had something that I wanted to push back on, if I felt like, for example, the cover design process wasn't going well, or if I just needed to vent, I knew that I could always go to her and she would have my back and she would just like really be there for me. Obviously, like in addition to my agent and stuff, the communication and the transparency there was really, really great. Another question I've been asked is Bindery Books a traditional publisher, hybrid publisher, and or vanity press? So I've answered this before, but they operate as a traditional publisher. Traditional in that authors are not paying for anything out of pocket. That's the main thing. Hybrid publishing is when authors and the publisher split costs for things. And a vanity press is basically when an author pays like a lump sum of money for various like service packages. You're not really like submitting your book for consideration. It's more just like paying a service to get the book published. In traditional publishing, authors never pay for anything related to production or editorial out of pocket. They may, of course, pay for external stuff, like if they want an additional publicist or if you want to commission character art. That's like all stuff that you do by yourself. But to actually bring the book to market, your publisher is paying that. Other aspects of traditional publishing is stuff like distribution. So having sales reps that, get you into retailers, into stores, physical stores, as well as having a publicist that gets you media coverage. And then there's the more abstract things like industry recognition. In the publishing industry, there is a line that is not as clear as it used to be, but it's still kind of there, where self-publishing and traditional publishing are seen as like two different things. Bindery, like other traditional publishers, pay in advance against royalties, which is like a lump sum of money that you receive. And you have to earn out the amount before you start seeing any royalties on future sales. Publishers will usually split up that lump sum. So let's say you sell your book for like $15,000. You're not going to get all $15,000 all at once. Your contract will stipulate what the payment schedule is, but it could be something like $5,000 when you sign, $5,000 when you deliver the manuscript, and then another $5,000 like when the book is published or something like that. And your agent will negotiate, obviously, to try to not have it split up into so many payments. How did I get my offer from Bindery and why did I say yes? So I have a literary agent who submitted to them. At that point, Local Heavens had been on sub for like 5 months, almost 5 months. And they are open to submissions year round from literary agents. But if you don't have a literary agent, they, I believe, do twice a year. They open up to unagented submissions for like a 3-day window. So if you're interested in submitting to them when that happens, the event is called Pitch Fest. And you have to like keep an eye on their socials or sign up to get notified when they do that, because it's a very short window. I have a whole separate video about the submission process. I will just say, long story short, we were submitting to a lot of Big Five publishers in the first few rounds of submission for Local Heavens. Big Five, this is not to generalize. Typically, they will play it much safer with their acquisitions, because to acquire a book at a bigger publisher, it has to go through so many more people than it would at like a smaller press. They're looking at a lot of different factors, marketability and how much they can sell, and books that this is similar to. And obviously they acquire things that are perceived as much more commercial. And so I remember after about 4 to 5 months, my agent asked me if I wanted to branch out with the submission pool. And I said yes, because I knew that indie houses tended to be more open to publishing stories that are a little genre bendy, outside of whatever was the market trends were. Like anytime you're reading something a little bit more niche, a lot of times indie publishers are more receptive to that. The thing that really sold me on Bindery was when I met the team and I felt like they not only understood the work, but they were really passionate about it. That was the main thing that I was looking for. For example, on the surface, you could see like sci-fi cyberpunk and think we're going to market this as a thriller. And that just wouldn't be true or accurate because the book it's not really trying to be a thriller. And those were a lot of the questions that I asked them on the offer call. And then obviously my agent handled a lot more of like the business side, distribution and publicity. What were their promotional strategies? There's kind of the writing side of things, and then there's the publishing side of things. And before you go into an offer call, you want to make sure you have your questions laid out. What was the editorial process like with Bindery? After the book was acquired, they take into consideration the genre that you're writing in, and they have like a network of fiction editors. And then I did dev edits. Like honestly, editorial moved really quickly because Local Heavens was acquired in 2024 and would be published in 2025. So it was a 1-year turnaround instead of a 2-year turnaround. But thankfully, it worked out because I had done a lot of my dev edits with my agent. So the book had already been edited quite a bit by the time it was acquired, which is not to say that my dev edit round wasn't substantial. Like it still was. It was a pretty big edit, but I'm really happy with where we ended up. And I loved working with my editor, and they asked me honestly great questions. Like it was really thorough. And what I really appreciated was that, before they read the manuscript, they had gotten on a Zoom call with me and wanted to know what my intentions were with the work. I never felt like they were pushing me in a direction that I didn't want to go. A lot of it was like, okay, I understand what you're trying to do. Like my feedback is going to be tailored towards trying to help you execute what you told me you're trying to do. I think my editor's comments like really, really tightened up the plot and the world building. This part of editorial is, I think, pretty standard across any traditional publisher, where you go through developmental edits, which are big picture edits, and then you go down to line edits, which is like fixing the phrasing of sentences. Then you go into copy edits, and then proofreading. And then Bindery does a cold read, which is where someone who has never worked on the book reads it cold, basically, and tries to find things that maybe the rest of us missed. Did I get a say in my audiobook narrator? Yes. So my audiobook rights were sold to Simon Maverick, which is an audio imprint of Simon & Schuster. The Simon Maverick team was also really nice to me. I got to meet someone from the Simon Maverick team like at my New York events. They made me fill out this whole like form to make sure that they were casting appropriately. Asked me how many narrators, backgrounds of the narrators that I was hoping for. So I asked for 2. I wanted a narrator for Nick and I wanted a narrator for Jordan. I think it was 3 auditions for Nick. I got to pick out of those 4 auditions for Jordan. The narrators for Nick auditioned with chapter 19, the night market scene. And then obviously the narrator for Jordan auditioned with Jordan's interlude chapter, or like just a section of it, not the whole thing. Pros and cons of not getting a Big 5 book deal. So I've actually been reflecting on this a lot this year, where I feel like it's very true when they say rejection is redirection. I really don't think that Local Heavens would have gotten the opportunities that it did if we had sold the project to anyone else. And that's just kind of how publishing works, right? Like, you get a rejection on a project because someone just didn't fall in love with it enough. And at the end of the day, as heartbreaking as it is in the moment, it really is a blessing when you finally do sell the project to someone who knows what to do with it. Because I remember how gutted I was when Local Heavens was just getting rejection after rejection from a lot of really amazing and kind Big 5 editors. With another project, I would love to work with them if the fit was there. Most of the times, the rejections that we were getting, it was like, we just can't take the book on for whatever reason. Whether it was not being able to get in-house support, the editorial vision not being 100% there, didn't fit their list, not knowing how to position it in the market, not quite knowing how to fit it within a literary space or a commercial space. The pros of a non-Big 5 deal for me was I felt like I got a lot of care and attention. And I think because at Bindery, for example, the list of books every season is much smaller than it is at a bigger publisher. They are able to kind of give attention to all books very equally. So the communication, the transparency, I never felt like I was being lied to. How do I say this like without getting in trouble? I've heard things. I've heard things, I've also experienced things where in publishing, people will just try to sell you moon and the stars, and when it all comes down to it, it's just smoke and mirrors. Bindery never really did that for me. Like every time they told me about something, it wasn't, yes, we're for sure going to do this for you. It's like, no, we're going to try to do it and we might not get it. I appreciated that level of transparency. I know that a publisher can't control every little thing, but as an author, I just want to know I'm not being lied to. You know, if I ask like, hey, are we going to do this thing? Are you pitching to this thing? I just want a straight answer, even if it's no. For example, this is just one example. Bindery was like, we're going to release titles paperback first. A lot of the times in science fiction fantasy, it's hardcover first, and then the price is higher. They said, we're going to do paperback first because, you know, it keeps the price down. We're going to try to get some kind of hardcover simultaneous release. They never said, we're for sure going to give you this, but it's always like, we're going to try very hard. We're going to pitch. The Aardvark deal, and then we also got a special edition with Vacrate. The transparency and the clear communication makes you feel really sane. And this isn't to say that at a big publisher, they're not going to communicate with you. You know, this isn't to generalize every single person who works in the industry. And I know a lot of my author friends have had fantastic experiences with their big five publisher. I also think that Bindery is uniquely positioned right now because while most publishers have to go through so many decision makers and they have to make all of these guesses about what is trending, what will hit a bestseller list, what probably won't hit a bestseller list, what they're willing to invest in and not. At Bindery, the tastemakers, they are the primary decision maker for their imprint. They aren't as concerned with like finding the most readers for a book rather than finding the right readers. That is really, I think, how they approach every single title. And they're also often thinking a lot about how do we publish the kind of stories that don't get to often be published under the current publishing structure. So a part of me feels, and this is like totally just conjecture, but I do feel that even if Local Heavens had gotten, let's say, a mid-list book deal at a big five, I'm not sure it would have found the same level of buzz and marketing and success and grassroots, you know, visibility. I'm not sure it would have found as much of that as it did if it weren't for Bindery's like marketing effort. Transparently, we sold enough copies within the first week or so to be, this is including pre-orders, of course, to be competitive for a bestseller list in the US. That was beyond my expectation. That when they told me the number, I was like, that's maybe triple what I was expecting. Now, what are the cons of working with a smaller publisher versus a bigger publisher? The main thing is going to be the advance. Let's say you have two offers on the table. One of them is $100,000 and the other is like $15,000, $20,000. Are you going to turn away the $100,000? Probably not. And you shouldn't. You should get your bag. At the end of the day, like, despite how much you might like a team and you might like the people, you know, it's hard to make money in publishing. You're absolutely not a sellout if it's like, no, I'm just going to take a six-figure deal, for example, or even if the discrepancy is something like $50,000 versus $10,000, like sometimes that's someone's entire year's salary. So yeah, would I recommend working with Bindery? Yes, I do. When authors DM me and email me, I always tell them it depends. Like, it depends what you expect out of your debut year. It depends what you want for yourself. It depends what you're writing, and being a lead title at a big five is going to be different than publishing with an independent publisher. It's not the same, usually. It might be harder to hit a bestseller list, or if you care a lot about industry clout, and I don't use the word clout like in a derogatory way, because for some people it means a lot for them to say, my debut novel is being published with Penguin. And it's okay. It's okay if that's like a really big thing for you. Every author has different goals and different things that they want. The heater is going crazy. It's a Canadian winter, you guys. Okay, let's go into some of the more general debut questions that I got. How do you deal with your writing being available to your friends and family? I'm about to start querying. Everyone I know wants to read my stuff. It makes me so anxious. You shouldn't feel pressured. No one has to read your book until you're ready. Friends and family should respect that. No one outside of my beta readers, agent, editor, and my critique partner, who does happen to be my brother, but no one outside of those people read my book until it was like published or I had an arc of it to share. And the reason for that is while I'm writing, I don't want to have any outside influence on the work other than like people that I trust. To be honest, personally, I don't get anxious about things like friends and family reading the book. I just don't care. I don't really care because at the end of the day, whoever is going to read the book, I don't want it to influence what I put into the book. And so I just write what I want to write. I also acknowledge that writing and making art is a very vulnerable act, and you do have to be prepared for it. If you want to be an author, it's just part of the job. Learning how to stand by what you wrote, to not be ashamed of what you're putting out into the world, to be proud of it. If it's less about like politics and vulnerability and more about just like, it's cringe that I write. Cringe is a state of mind. Cringe is a prison of your own making. And I always think to myself that quote that's like, your dreams are on the other side of your fear. Like that's just how I feel about it. You got to dismantle cringe in your mind. It's more cringe if you judge someone for writing, because look, you're going to be a published author and they're not. So that is way more cringe. I haven't read your book, but based on what I know about it, it seems like there's a lot of critiques of capitalism, America. Has Bindery been supportive of the thematic direction of your book? Have you felt pressure to tone down the message and make it more palatable? No. Cyberpunk is a genre, and Local Heavens as a book, it isn't the kind of thing that you acquire unless you know what you're getting into and unless you like understand the thematic messaging. Like Local Heavens is a very overtly political book. All art is political, yes, but Local Heavens is overtly political. If you are for some reason like, no, actually, I love billionaires, then yeah, this book isn't for you. You probably wouldn't have any interest reading it, acquiring it, whatever. Also, like the concept of trying to tone down or pare back the political overtones of a dystopian fiction novel, it defeats the entire purpose of the book existing. Actually, my editor, now that I'm remembering, we were talking about the ending at some point. Not in these words, but essentially the interaction was like, hey, Nick falls in love with a billionaire. Won't people judge him for that? And I literally was like, yeah, they will judge him for that, and they should, and he's not a good person either. Also, I don't live in America. I'm not American, and I think it's very important to critique American empire when possible. Is there any specific advice you have for POC authors that you think is helpful but isn't really talked about in the wider author tube? Actually, there was a TikTok I watched from Nisha Sharma, who is a romance author, BIPOC romance author. I'm just going to play it here.
The reason why a lot of these marginalized titles aren't being picked up is because publishing is built in a way that specifically marginalizes certain communities. It is not built to support diverse stories. Yes, there is a level of subjectivity that is involved in picking up some of these titles, but if you were doing exactly the same process that you do for all of your other books, when you were trying to place these marginalized titles with some of these sales reps, you are literally putting up that blockade yourself. If an author asks you, hey, why is my book not being picked up by some of these big bookstores? Why are my sales order numbers so low for some of these retail chains? What you should say is, we understand that the industry itself is built in a way that is preventing titles like yours from reaching the readership that it needs to reach. What we plan on doing is going back to our sales strategy, going back to the drawing board and revising what we've already done to make sure that we can create a custom approach so that it's getting into the hands of the people that should read your book.
One thing that I have learned from this year as a BIPOC debut author is like, your people are going to be your community. That's not to say that you won't have readers outside of that. Of course you will. When it comes to like the people who will often champion the book really proudly, like on social media, who will recommend it to people, a lot of the times it's your own community. I definitely feel like the main reason that Local Heavens was able to get a lot of that early buzz was off of the backs of other queer readers, other BIPOC readers, other Filipino readers. I can see that in like the people who are tagging me on social media. So with that in mind, I really try to in turn support other BIPOC authors, marginalized authors, because I know that broadly speaking, publishers are not investing in those stories at the same level. Like there's a reason that the Goodreads Choice Awards and the most popular categories within the Goodreads Choice Awards, that the demographics look the way they do. I always think about that quote that's like, in order to have a village, you need to be a villager. And that is very true. I was invited to speak on a panel in Toronto for BIPOC of Publishing, and it was literally focused on BIPOC authors in the Toronto GTA area. There was a romance panel and a science fiction fantasy panel. I was one of the speakers on the SFF panel, and it was just really beautiful to be in a space with other BIPOC authors, with BIPOC readers who wanted to support BIPOC authors. Like I got to meet some readers, I got to sign some books, and yeah, just things like that. It's like the community is so valuable because they will be the people to support you even in the moments where it feels like the broader publishing forces aren't supporting you. What parts of Filipino and or queer experience helped inspire the text? So this is, I guess, in relation to Local Heavens. Both of these things, they aren't really like things that I consciously thought about in brainstorming, like before I started writing. I think it was just very instinctual. When I was rewriting the prologue, so the prologue that actually ended up in the book, it opens with Nick working in Manila. So we see how he is perceived as American when he's in the Philippines, and then on the other end of it, the kind of microaggressions he experiences while working in corporate America as a Filipino man. And there are world building reasons for why specifically it's harder for him to secure work. For me, it was important to depict like bias and discrimination as something that isn't super, super overt. It's less about there are slurs being thrown around and more like there is a feeling of alienation that Nick experiences throughout the book in ways that are very obvious in some scenes and much more subtextual in other scenes. But at the same time, there's also an incredible sense of warmth and community when it comes to Filipino culture. And I wanted to contrast that with the very inorganic, disingenuous, bleak side of corporate America that we see in the rest of the book. And particularly, I wanted to pay homage to that element of Filipino culture. So there's an entire chapter dedicated to that. It's chapter 18 and 19. It's this type of family, home away from home vibe that is reflected in the Local Heavens night market sequence where Nick is in Little Manila. For that moment in time, like these two characters feel like they can really let their guard down because that's just the experience that you have just like in a Filipino home. You know, it doesn't matter that you aren't really family. It doesn't matter that you don't know each other that well. In terms of like the queer representation, the queer experience, I really didn't think that much of it. I saw the experience less as I'm writing a queer love story and more like I'm writing a story about desire and loneliness and a quest for belonging. And here are these incredibly flawed people who are looking for that belonging and that purpose in all of the wrong places. The point is that love and attraction isn't defined by gender. Through Nick's perspective, he is a character who doesn't even realize how deeply he just wants to be seen and understood. And I think in both of his relationships, both of those characters bring out different sides of him. It was very fun, like writing those two situationships in tandem, because I think both of those characters love him so deeply, and he also loves those characters deeply for different reasons. Oh my God, also, should I say this? Maybe I shouldn't say this. I was scrolling through TikTok and on my For You page, this is the first time it's ever happened, but I got a TikTok for a review of Local Heavens that I wasn't tagged in, but it like came up on my feed. Thank God it ended up being a positive review, but the one thing they said was like, my one complaint, and I held my breath. I was like, oh no, what did they not like about the book? And they go, my one complaint was that Local Heavens wasn't poly. You know what? I'll take it. Were there any things about the published version of the book that you felt like you had to compromise on with your editors, large and small scale, or do you feel like the work you did with your publisher editors made the book stronger? I do feel like, and you know, maybe this is just my experience, but I do feel like my experience in traditional publishing has been that I've had a lot more editorial control over the manuscript than I thought I would. I think that there's this idea that authors constantly have to like succumb to whatever their publisher wants. Like if they want you to write something, you just have to write it. I had such a good relationship with my publisher and my editor. If I didn't want to do something, I did not have to do it. But I will say that the majority of changes that were suggested, I did implement, whether it was my editor or my agent. Every time I got feedback, I would always think on it. Even if I didn't necessarily want to make that change in the moment, I could see where they were coming from. And eventually I would make the changes they suggested. I think a lot of that does come down to the fact that I had a lot of conversations with my agent and my editor about what I was trying to do with the work. They very much were coming from a place of, I want to help you achieve the vision you want. I want to sharpen your vision. The book had like 70-80% less romance in it in the first draft than it does now. Like now it's literally marketed as love story, as a dystopian romance, whatever you want to call it. In its initial iteration, like I have literal writing vlogs from 2 years ago where I was like, Local Heavens is not a romance. No, it's not. Girl, psych. Yes, it is. And I do think the book is better for it, unfortunately. How do you make author friends? I feel so alone. I've always felt like an outcast. I have a lot of authors who I feel like would be really great friends, but I don't know how to meet them because I'm a nobody. They're published authors. I feel like they look down on other writers. Does being traditionally published make you feel differently towards non-published authors? I have a lot of thoughts about this. I almost considered making a whole separate video. There's this hierarchy that I think people perceive about published versus non-published authors, or agented versus non-agented authors, traditional versus self-published authors. others. And I think we just need to put all of this away. I think it's a very unhealthy and unproductive way of networking or of making friends or of just seeing the world. I don't like this idea that no matter what side of the dynamic you're on, that we are defining worth based on such external things. In terms of how to make writer friends, it's really just like making friends in general. It happens slowly, it happens over time. It happens through just like being a nice, kind, trustworthy person, not coming across as transactional. For example, if you're like following an author, you might have a lot more of a connection to them than they do to you. If you've been following them for a while, but they don't know who you are, for example. You have to remember that no one is entitled to give you their time. Even if to you, there's someone that you really look up to, maybe they don't answer your message because maybe they don't see it, because especially depending on who you're talking to, they might get a lot of DMs. I know for me, like I'm not even someone who has a huge social media following, and I still get more DMs than I can like reasonably keep up with. So you can imagine someone who has even just a little more visibility than me, they probably have like way more emails, DMs. A lot of the times it isn't personal. It isn't like they're clicking into your profile and they're being like, this person doesn't have a book out. Like that's not the judgment that people are making when they are deciding whether or not to be your friend. Like 9 times out of 10, it's just because you're a stranger and they've never interacted with you before, and maybe they don't follow you, or maybe you don't post on socials. Like it's literally like a parasocial dynamic. And I don't say this like to be like, hey, don't talk to people who are out of your league. No, because I've been on the other end of it too, where there are authors who I would love to be friends with. If and when I do like send them a DM or I initiate that conversation, I never initiate it with the expectation that, oh, they must continue to have a conversation with me. We must be best friends. If I'm DMing them to just like say something nice, I just want to tell them that and hope they read it. And I don't even really care if I get back more than a little heart on the message. As someone who has also been on the other side of it, where people will DM me and then immediately like ask for a favor, that's what I mean when sometimes it sounds or it feels transactional. My like general advice, if you want to make a connection with any writer, no matter who they are, it can start with just sending a genuine message to someone about whatever, whether you like their work, whether they've inspired you. It might progress beyond that into a conversation, and it might not, and that's okay. When we start projecting negativity onto someone, or when you're like really pushy and insistent, or I think that's when you break the bond. Also, does not help when people are overly self-deprecating and say things like, I know I'm totally irrelevant. No matter who you are, don't talk down about yourself. Don't sell yourself short. Obviously don't come into someone's DMs like bragging, but like don't be so harsh on yourself. I always recommend that writers try to network with other writers who are in the same boat as you, because oftentimes that is where like a really deep kinship can form. If you are a querying writer, you will probably form like a really, really close bond with someone who is also a querying writer, because you're going through the same struggles together. And a lot of like the author besties, author friend groups that you see online, a lot of them are just people who have kind of all are in similar stages of their writing career and have just like progressed together. Let's take a brief intermission to see if Clemmie will join this video. Wow, Clemmie. Let's see if she'll say anything. Oh. Anything to say? Okay, this was a question that I got a lot. I know you can't say why you didn't hit list, crying for you, but are you able to give hypothetical vague advice about anything to make sure an author avoids or does to hit list? For some background, if you don't know, hitting a bestseller list, or like becoming an instant bestseller, a book hitting a list basically a week after it comes out, a lot of that has to do with publishers pushing pre-orders, because all pre-orders of a book count towards the book's first week sales. So I posted a TikTok where I talked about, or I didn't talk about it, but I mentioned that Local Heavens was potentially competitive. It didn't happen. And the reason it didn't happen is something behind the scenes that I don't think I'm really at liberty to talk about. It wasn't anything malicious. It was just unforeseen circumstances. And that's all I'm going to say about it. This question, I feel like it's really important for people to understand that there is nothing that an author can do on their own to like guarantee they hit a bestseller list or to ruin their chances of hitting a bestseller list. Hitting a bestseller list is mostly just indicative of how much marketing a publisher has put behind pushing out a title. In traditional publishing, you have lead titles, and lead titles in a season are just the books that publishers have propped up to be their most popular books that they are putting a lot of marketing dollars into. A lead title, usually if your book is a lead title, you might go on tour, you might get special editions, you might get like those like deluxe limited edition first editions with like sprayed edges, you might have like a big pre-order campaign. Typically bestsellers are like more or less determined at the point that you sign your publishing contract, which is like 2 years before the book ever hits shelves. Like if a publisher decides we're really going to push this book, you get a huge 6-7 figure deal. Like you're basically being set up for success. And that doesn't mean that like, you're cheating the bestseller list. This is just how the industry works. The one thing that an author can do really is to just like write a super commercial book and then hope that you get like lead title status at a big five, in which case, yeah, you maybe will be very competitive for a list. If you really want to like shoulder everything on your own, I mean, you can try to play the social media game, you can pray for some viral posts, you can build an audience super far in advance of your publishing date if that's something that you want to do. Do I necessarily recommend that authors do that and put their energy into that? No, unless you love social media, you love the promo aspect of it. And most authors that I've talked to are like, hell no, I'd rather just write my books. As many people told me when I posted the TikTok that I posted, worrying about hitting a bestseller list or treating hitting a list as the most important milestone that you can have as an author is going to turn you into a crazy person. There is really no advice that I would give an author to be like, do this in order to hit a list, or don't do this in order to hit a list. Not to completely reframe the question, but my answer would just be like, don't even care, don't even worry about hitting a list because it does not determine your career. I think so many people frame success around, being on a list for 1 week. I think also perspective is what really matters to me. In my situation, like I know as someone who, wrote a literary science fiction novel with an independent publisher, even getting the level of visibility and the level of first week sales that we were able to get, like that in and of itself is a victory to me. And I don't take that for granted. One thing that so many authors told me as well was like, publishing has this weird way of making even successes feel like failures. That is very true. Is it necessary to have a social media presence before pursuing traditional publishing? No. This is definitely a misconception because I see authors talking about this all the time where they're like, agent didn't want to sign me because I didn't have social media. Then that agent like isn't a real agent. This like notion that people need to have social media in order to publish fiction is not true. There is definitely an element now where having a very large social media following that would probably guarantee you thousands and thousands of sales would make you more appealing to publishers, but it doesn't mean that people without those social media followings aren't getting book deals. My social media following was like maybe not even 10,000 YouTube subscribers. Yeah, definitely less than 10,000 YouTube subscribers when I got my literary agent. At the end of the day, you still have to write a marketable and quality manuscript. So what are some signs that editors who express interest in your work are a good fit for you / what was your experience with your editors in the beginning? I'm going to just like say this more broadly, and it's like not just editors, but like the publisher, because my dev editor, again, my case was unique where my developmental editor, the person who was doing edits on the book with me, was not the same as my publisher / acquiring editor. So I'm just going to say my publisher in general. When do you know that you should seriously consider a book deal if it's being offered to you? And this could also go for agents as well. I would say it would be like 3 things: passion, what they liked about the work and why. Number 2 would be editorial vision. So if there's any changes that they want to make to the work, what are they, and do they align with what your vision of the work is? And then number 3 would be market fit. Where do they see your work being positioned in the market? Because if you have written a book and you think it's contemporary literary fiction, and they're like, no, actually, this is romance. Like, we want this to be shelved next to like an Ali Hazelwood book. And they might have a very different idea of like how they want to edit and market your book, and you maybe might not know if you're happy with that. I talked about what my experience working with my editor was in a previous question. I would just say on any kind of offer call, you really want to align with like, do they actually see what your intentions are? Because they could like it, but maybe the reasons that they like it aren't the reasons that you would want them to say. Like, I remember in my offer call for Local Heavens, I was looking for very specific things. Wanted my publisher to say that they liked it because they understood what I was trying to do in relation to The Great Gatsby, that they felt like it was literary sci-fi and not like a cyberpunk thriller. I wanted them to really connect with Nick. I wanted them to understand why queer BIPOC slant to the story was very important. I wanted them to like the writing and the voice. They said all of those things to me unprompted. Like, I had said nothing in the call except for hi, hello, nice to meet you. And then Catherine, my acquiring editor, my bindery tastemaker, launched immediately into her spiel about why she loved it without me asking any questions, without me saying anything. And that's when I knew that they had the passion and the understanding for the work. Okay, last question. If you were to go back in time to the beginning of your querying and publishing process, is there anything you would do differently? Number one lesson and takeaway from this year: rejection and imposter syndrome never ends. You think it ends maybe when you get an agent. You think it ends when you get a book deal. It never ends. There's always going to be something that you want that you might not get. For example, when I got my book deal, I was like, yay, I got a book deal, but can I get any subrights deals? Can we get any foreign translation deals? And then when we got UK, I was like, okay, can we sell into any other territory? Local Heavens is a very American book, and that's just like the nature of this particular book. Not every book is going to be able to achieve the same thing. You know, there were a bunch of like little smaller things where it was like, I didn't get any starred trade reviews. That was another thing that I was talking to my friends about a lot, where I was like, we got a lot of trade reviews and they were positive reviews, but no starred reviews. Like little things like that where you don't really realize that you care or you know about it until you're like going through it. At the end of the day, it's like readers don't care. Like, it's not necessarily going to affect your sales, but it's just like the random kind of external validation that you want. I would also say the other lessons that I've learned is that you can't let resentment and industry jealousy, creative publishing envy bubble up inside of you. There is going to be a lot of times where you just can't avoid it, right? And there's going to be an author in your debut cohort who is getting literally everything that you can imagine. You're like, that's never going to happen for me. Log off social media. You will feel better immediately. You don't need to constantly exist in this online space where you're seeing everyone's achievements measured up and quantified next to your own. I will link in the description a Substack that my friend Beta wrote about professional jealousy. It is very well written. It is very realistic in my opinion. And I think if you're struggling with feelings of professional jealousy, really help kind of make you feel better, hopefully. And also it just serves as a reminder that everyone behind the scenes is going through something. As I've mentioned before, I would also say a huge thing is building community, making writing and publishing friends, making friends with your debut cohort. The last thing I will say is don't be afraid to ask questions. There were so many times where I was like, I don't know if this is going to be a stupid question. I don't know if it's going to bother my agent. I don't know if it's going to bother my publisher. Just ask it. If you are curious about something, especially if you're going through it for the first time, if you ask something nicely, most of the times you're just going to get a very kind and normal answer. It's important to remember that the success of your book is something that your whole team can share, and they want your book to succeed. I wouldn't say as much as you, because obviously your book is your book, baby, but they care. And I definitely wish that I had like asked more questions than I did. That would have just like eased some of my anxiety and ironed out some things that behind the scenes could have been ironed out. That is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everyone who supported Local Heavens this year. 2026 is going to be a new era. I will hopefully be bringing you guys along more into the process of finishing up and editing The Floating House, which is my next book. It's so different than Local Heavens. I crashed out so many times. New year, new me. Do a title and a premise reveal, and I can't wait to share more. As always, if you liked this video, make sure to subscribe. I hope all your writing projects are going well. If you are writing your book in the new year, good luck. That's all. I'll see you guys in my next video.